And we're live. So, a brief introduction. So, this is going to be part two. Shark, who played Mirabelle from the last stream that we did with Ben. Mirabelle is the initiating PvP combatant, and Shark is Mirabelle's player. So, we're going to sort of explore what happened in Ben's Mythic Halo game from that other perspective with regard to PvP. And I know I'm just sort of launching into things. So, and the way this came about is that Shark actually reached out to me and asked, because you watched the last stream, I would think, and you reached out and you said, hey, you offered in that stream to kind of, have this discussion live. And as the second part, or at least the second party to this conflict that took place, you kind of wanted to get your side of the story out there. I think that it's great to have it from both sides, and I think that since you were the initiating player / character, that there's going to be maybe a lot more to go through with regard to decision making, with regard to build up and all that kind of stuff. So I'm really looking forward to this. BGD, thank you for being here. I'm surprised you're not sick of me yet after this morning. BGD and I hang out in the same chat on Wednesday mornings, and he's got a lot of good stuff to say. Really smart guy, really competent GM. I've played in a game of his for the Rune Jammer, which is now called something else. And BGD, if you want to supply that link, I'm happy to put it in chat. But I'm now sidetracked. So let's start on. So Ben, you're the GM. Shark, you're the player. How do you guys want to address this? And I'm just going to kind of, like I did last time, just take a step back and allow this conversation to take place. So please do go for it.
Sure. I think I'll let Shark go ahead as the player. I mean, I spoke plenty last time, so I think I'll let Shark go through, and I can talk about any of the in-betweens or anything that happened from a GM perspective. So, Shark.
Hi. Hello. I'm Shark. I played Mirabelle and the PvP incident that you spoke about before. I did kind of want to touch on it a bit too, my side on it, but also do want to warn anybody who may be watching now or later that with the character of Mirabelle, there is a bit of a content warning of psychological trauma and the fact that she is quite literally a child soldier. She is a 16-year-old who is actively killing other individuals in a wartime environment. So it's kind of one of those stories that it's more on the serious end on tabletop stories. Normally you hear about maybe some goofy actions between party members in fantasy and other things like that, but in this particular game, as we had mentioned previously in the last conversation, it's more of a serious topic. We handle more serious things there, and it's just how it is. You need your own post-session therapy sometimes, but it's good stuff, I promise. Yeah, so I figured give a little bit of backstory of Mirabelle to her whole issue, her whole problem with Hester, and her process of thinking to understand how these things came about. Because as a player, I don't actively seek out PvP engagements, even though I was the instigator of this particular one. It's not something I actively seek out. And we did touch a little bit, you guys did touch a little bit last time on the whole, well, it's what my character would do, typically being a bad thing. Yes, I agree. And how sometimes that one instance, in this instance, it's not. I am still a firm believer of doing what your character would do in any kind of situation. Really think about somebody, put yourself in your character's position. Think about what it is that you would do if you were in that position. This is how you thought. This is how you were raised. This is, in this instance, putting myself in the headset of, okay, I am an indoctrinated child soldier. What would I do in this moment? What was I trained to do? And that kind of helps get these natural player character versus player character antagonizing situations that are natural to the story flow, and the absolute most important thing, consensual to all parties involved. And typically, you would also get the permission of your GM, which in this instance we kind of we kind of didn't, but as we found out, Ben absolutely loved it, which thrilled the crap out of me. It's already had some bad instances of PvP stuff before, and I'm very much an advocate of it's okay if everybody's consenting and it drives the narrative forward. It's not these stupid instances where it's like, oh, hey, they keep taking the items before I can get to it, or they keep running off without the party, or whatever their idiotic reason may be. Personal opinion, I guess. But in this instance, you have two conflicting character ideals, like heavily conflicting, where one party, Hester, is somebody that sees what we're doing as wrong and understands that it needs to be reported because what we're doing is illegal, and that's all that matters. Like, that's how it's seen by Mirabelle, and how I had seen it at the time. And then you've got the other party, Mirabelle, who sees Oni as the Office of Intelligence, the whole spook agency spoken about before. She sees Oni as the first and last line of defense for humanity. Well, and understands and acknowledges that they do some incredibly messed up things, but it's for the greater good, and she has resigned herself, especially with this whole incident between her and Hester, that she has been raised as a tool. She is intelligent enough to recognize this and understand this is her best use and her best way to be able to protect humanity. Be the best tool that she can be for Oni, because she believes Oni knows what's right. Okay, yeah, maybe I had to call in a mortar strike on some friendly troops, but in the end, it was Oni who had me do it, so it must have been for good reason, and ultimately this will help humanity better in the long run. You have this person who sees these mentalities where she's very happy and friendly-go-lucky with people on the outside and on the norm. When she's not dealing with these situations, she tries to make friends with people as much as she can. But when it comes down to it, she's going to do the job. And the thing that I have to keep in mind while playing this character, especially with the instance of something like this PvP instance, because these are two characters that in lore were basically sisters. They grew up together. They went through all kinds of training together. For better or worse, they were siblings. So she basically had to kill her own flesh and blood. So you have to think about the mental impact that that's going to put on your character. How is this going to affect my character? How is this going to affect the other character and the rest of the party and the story as a whole? This is not. You have to think about more than just yourself as a player in these instances and put yourself in the boots of these characters. I may be talking in circles. My apologies. But it's a 2 centimeter wide seesaw that you've got to balance here on a freaking what do they call those things? The wood splitting axis. A big hunk of metal on his little itty bit, or sitting beneath this little itty bitty wood. It's a balancing act for this PvP situation, because you may think that that's what your character is going to want to do. And in this instance, I found through going through the proper channels of reaching out to Craig and being like, hey, Craig, this is a big point of contention between our two characters. My character in this situation would kill Hester the absolute moment she can without being found out. However, I'm open to other things. What are your thoughts on this? And he, as he said before, he threw me a ball, I'll catch it and throw it back. And he did, and it was fantastic. But that was part of the things you got to understand, is going to these, the balancing act of these two characters, I'm having to worry about a whole other human being on the other end of this. It's not the same as killing an NPC that's being run by the GM. There's going to be plenty of other NPCs that's going to definitely be for the story. You are impacting another whole individual's life. Because for these serious kinds of campaigns, we do tend to put a good bit of feeling into our characters, those of us that do heavy into role play. You put time and an emotional investment into these characters. You don't want to just cut that out of somebody's life. It's something you got to make sure that they're going to be okay with, and is this something that your character would truly do, or are you being selfish? Think about everybody. And luckily he was open to this whole idea, and we played it through. And I think the other most big important thing to remember when discussing this as an instance of PvP, I gave Craig multiple outs for allowing this kind of situation to resolve itself in not killing off one of the players. And I did that on purpose as a player, not just in the shoes of the character, because this is somebody's life, part of somebody's life that they're doing. So when I had Mirabelle hold the sword up to Hester's back, with one arm around the neck and the sword pushing up, it was a matter of her asking one or two questions to see if she really does need to kill Hester, because you also have this moment of a 16-year-old who's done some incredibly heinous war crimes already, starting to desensitize herself, but she's having to kill her own flesh and blood here. Is an incredibly emotional moment. You can't just off a character like, oh, I stab you and that's it, you're dead. This is a big moment. Allow that other player to be able to role play as well. This isn't just a you moment. And luckily, we kind of had a fantastic enough dynamic between the two of us in that moment to where we didn't need GM intervention. But I think it's important to remember that when you have these situations, whether you are GMing this or a player taking part or witnessing this, it is important for the GM to make sure that if he needs to step in to make sure both players have player agency, do so. But don't be afraid to let your players take the reins and solve this out amongst themselves. It, if done properly, can do nothing but add to the storytelling, as we saw in this previous situation. Now we've got a whole other layer to what's going on, to us being stranded on this unknown planet, having killed off another Spartan, which is essentially killing off a whole battalion of regular soldiers or something. Is it justified? Is it really something you can justify? Is it worth it? So I guess that's kind of it for my on like a PvP standpoint. But that's nothing to be said for the whole psychological side of this kind of event, of being a child soldier, dealing with all of these things, and the impact that it does to somebody's head in playing a character that's dealing with those, and how it kind of causes you to take a look at things that are going on in real life and kind of wake up to what's going on while you are escaping to another world. It's kind of making it's kind of keeping your conscience in check, checking your morality. Yeah. I don't want to take up everything, so if somebody else wants to add.
No, that's fine. I actually have some questions, unless Ben, you want to jump in.
No. Go ahead, dude.
What was to like get really kind of hyper focused on the moment where you made the decision to engage Craig or Hester?
Right.
And it was a very, please correct me if I'm wrong, but if I'm remembering correctly, it was a very quick, very decisive motion. There wasn't really any combat rounds. It was just you making the decision, then boom, it was done.
Oh, okay. Yeah, I can expand on that if you like. Yeah.
Yeah, well, I specifically am very interested in like how did the conversation unfold? Was it a conversation between you two? I mean, you didn't just like sneak up on him and sink a knife in him. There was some sort of altercation that was taking place. There was some sort of disagreement.
Yes.
And so there was this evolving tension that led up to, the release of the tension, which was Hester's death. So can you get into that a little bit?
Yeah, I can. The kind of tension from that, in a matter of number of sessions, developed fairly quickly. But as far as the characters were concerned, like, we're talking in-game time, it was something that happened over the course of, I'd say, a month or two. Back up here, been on this podcast. Mirrodom was a massive time sink for us.
3 months total.
Yeah,
Because
so
there was
it's
a few things prior to that kind of led into it.
yeah.
Like Adams being the kind of key instigator in that. But I'll get to that once you've done.
Okay. Yeah. So these are events that are building up in a matter of 3 months, where for 2.5 of those months, Mirabelle was under the impression that Hester was a complete rock solid ally and wouldn't say anything about the Black Ops that they were doing, could be trusted to do what's needed to be done at the end of the day and back her up. But the moment that she found out that Hester was the one who sold them out was a massive tipping point for her. It was it was kind of a psychological impact, or because here's somebody that she went through all of this training with, she had known and been close to for over half her life. She thought she could be trusted, and that trust is broken. So you have to go down this road of, well, now that this trust is broken over something like this, how can I ever trust this person again? That's kind of Mirabelle's line of thinking towards Hester. So you go through this process of about, I think it was 2 weeks, where they were imprisoned on the ship, and she had those two between them getting imprisoned and the ship getting attacked, etc., all the good stuff. She had 2 weeks to ruminate on this, and ended up coming to the conclusion that if Hester can't be trusted to keep Oni's secrets, then Hester needs to be eliminated, because that last captain that they killed couldn't be trusted to keep Oni's secrets. So if a captain couldn't be trusted and needed to be killed, a Spartan definitely needed to be eliminated if they couldn't be trusted.
Okay, so this wasn't a matter of like vengeance or survival. It was maybe colored by vengeance, but
it was a shield, like, I'd say about half by vengeance, half by loyalty to Oni.
But you had only just recently been in a situation where secrets couldn't be kept and you had to eliminate someone within the chain of command. And so this was I'm going to use the term easier, right? It was easier in that regard because this wasn't a captain. This was someone who you grew up with and were a soldier with. But it was also likely more difficult from another perspective because they were sister.
Yes.
Okay.
I'd say logically an easy decision, but an emotionally difficult one.
Okay. I generally tend not to get involved in PvP situations because I don't take it well. And I know this about myself. Now, if we are in a game where PvP is like expected, so I've played in Star Wars Sith games. I've played in games where PvP is the expectation, right? It's established up front. But if it's not something that's established up front and it kind of sneaks around the back, that's something that genuinely bothers me. Like I get angry.
Right.
And so this sort of a situation, I don't know, like trying to put myself in that situation, it seems like a very natural consequence. It was an organic outcrop of the story and the events that were taking place at hand. As far as like my own personal role playing expectations go, I approach virtually every character, at least, in this particular phase of my life, I approach every character as though they're going to die. They are impermanent. They are not, they're temporary. And
Yeah.
so, now I might not have a big a problem engaging in this sort of PvP, especially if it's like a really cool, memorable moment, right? Like in Craig's shoes, and Craig even said so last stream. It was very it was a very satisfying. It was surprising. There was grief. There was processing the loss, but it was very satisfying because of the way that it had built up to a natural consequence of what was going on in the moment.
Yeah.
So I think that's a very sort of interesting perspective to take personally. But again, I generally tend not to play PvP.
Yeah.
Once again,
And
I have in the past.
if I
I've
may,
done it before. I'm familiar with it, but it just it's very interesting. Ben, do you have anything?
Shark, you wanted to?
yeah.
Oh, I am so sorry. Sure,
That's
go ahead.
okay.
Apologies.
The one important thing, I think I missed a very important part of the answer for your question. As I don't think I think I only answered part of it. The actual decision of as a player to kill off Craig's character wasn't something that was instantaneous. I think that's another important thing to know about this as to why it led to such a good outcome. I had time to sit on it because it was one session where Mirabelle found out, and even I as a player found out why we got caught. So I had, I think, another session or two or another week or two in real life to sit and think about this, because my initial reaction was, oh yeah, Mirabelle would absolutely kill Hester because she'd be pissed and at the betrayal of trust. She can't be trusted, just like that last captain. She's got to go. But it gave me time to sit and logically think about this and go through the whole motions that I mentioned earlier with the understanding it's not just a player character, it's a whole part of a whole other human's life type stuff, all of that. And even in the moment where I had Mirabelle actually kill Hester, it was a semi-instantaneous decision because she snuck up, she faked her IFF not working properly, and then with a few blinks, shut off the IFF, used that and her armor's cloaking ability to sneak up on Hester while invisible, and put her in a hold with the blade pushed up against the back, and gave her a moment to answer to get out of the PvP situation. And when the answer was given, it was, or when the question was asked, it was already immediately made. The decision was made as the question was asked of, if it's this answer, she lives. If it's this answer, she dies. And Craig, the player, has said that whatever happens in this, he is perfectly okay with throwing the ball back and forth. I'm going to put trust in him. He said he's okay if Hester dies. That's the important part. If the other player is not okay, do not explore the subject further. Do not pass go. Do not collect $200. Stop it. Find another route. Yeah, that was it. Ben, if you want to go ahead.
What I think is interesting about this is, Shark said quite a few times, well, the captain couldn't be trusted to keep their secrets. The captain did nothing wrong. The only reason why the captain was outed was because Craig's character had supplied the other side with the evidence of what the team had done, which linked them back to the captain. The captain did nothing wrong. This whole incident was caused because Hester ratted them out. But even now, as Shark talks about it, she's still almost indoctrinated into thinking that that was why they had to kill the captain, but that's not the case at all. Which I think is interesting because there was build up for this. I mentioned it in the last talk, but the whole point of the arc was to kind of provoke the morals conversation about war is bad, and sometimes in war people do bad things, and I'm sure all the players objectively knew they were doing bad things, and because it's not real, we can explore it, right? But it's interesting because even now, when she talks about it, there's still that level of, well, they couldn't be trusted, so I killed them. Like, that's how their character went for the thought process, right? So, and I don't want to say social engineering, but I think that's what I did, and it lured the players into, because when you play a game and it's like your consequences of actions, right? And it's like you could like load up Star Wars Battlefront and start killing all of your allies, but then the match ends and it's whatever, it doesn't matter.
Yeah.
Well, in a role playing game, you don't have that. In a role playing game, your consequences carry weight, and any dungeon master, worth their XP points is gonna ensure that their consequences have weight, and that's exactly what I did here. But I waited. I waited a long time because I wanted to see just how deep they'd go. Because I wanted to see what direction the group wanted to take the game in. If they wanted to go pro Black Operations, or no, we're gonna not do that. We want to stay kind of above board. And I was happy for the game to go the way. And the problem was that the group chose both. And that's what made this so surprising, was because I had to kind of figure out, oh, okay, shit. We've got confliction. We have conflict. And what was good about it was that there was, I think last time I said, was it the two C's, was like consent and communication. But I think consent, creativity, and communication. I think that's what I want to kind of coin for this, is what makes PvP. What makes PvP work is consent, communication, and creativity. Definitely in that order. It's important that both players feel comfortable with what's about to happen, and that there is a out of character meta conversation about what is going to happen, and then there is a creative role played scenario or outcome that fits the situation and fits the context of the current game. And as Shark said, if Craig at any point, if Craig said no, should have backed off, right? And I think that's the most important thing, because there are toxic players. There is that guy. There is, but it's what my character would do in a negative sense, and that can ruin that can immediately deflate a game, and it can cause out again conflict, and it can cause those issues. Now, you might want to argue, let me just flip the coin for a second. You could almost say, well, I want my players to be angry at each other because I want them to feel annoyed and frustrated at the betrayal. You could say that, sure, if you're doing like extreme role playing and you want your players to actually hate each other. Sure, be my guest, right? But that is not fun. That you're creating hate by doing that. You're creating negativity, which you don't want in a role-playing environment, especially if the game is going to go for another year or two, which is what I'm planning for Halo anyway, right? So you can't harbor hate and distrust. And this is the magic of role play, because ultimately, well, okay, I can't say ultimately, because we get into the whole do we really feel what our characters feel debate, but that's another conversation for another talk. But ultimately, we feel something because it's an interactive medium. It's like playing a video game with extra steps, and we are our characters to some extent. We are, we are that persona, right? We become part of that modern myth, yeah, and it can be difficult to allow fake emotions to harbor, because that's what you might need to do. Now, everyone has differences in has a difference in emotional tolerance. We all have a difference in emotional vulnerabilities, like because every human has the triple vulnerability scale. Um, and a GM, unless they have done like a pocket psychoval with their players, you're not going to know that, and you aren't going to know how your players are going to react to this kind of event, right? So I would say that this is something that I don't think we could have happen again in the campaign, because I don't think it would remotely be handled as well. I think potentially it would be overhandled, which would then ruin the reaction we got from it. Ultimately, we were quite lucky to have a PvP experience work out and it roll out narratively, only because the players were all just chill with it. If you tried to do something like this at a convention table, no way, Jose. And if you tried to do this with a new group, with a new GM, again, no way, because it sets a negative precedent. It sets a, well, this GM will let people do what they want to an
Plus,
extent,
these
right?
things just take time to build up
Mhm.
to this kind of a point too. Yeah, there are a few things we had built between us as players. We built the trust between us and players to understand that we're going to be decent with players at the table, as far as rules following, not stepping on other players' toes, countless other things. We grew to trust each other as characters as well, and trust each other tactically on the battlefield type of stuff. So you had this long process of connection between the players, and that I think is also the important thing for PvP stuff, is to
Mhm.
have that connection.
Yeah, it's to harbor that, and I think one of the things that Jax said to me really early on, actually, and this has given me so many shower thoughts. Um, I explained, I explained to them what kind of games I run, and their reaction was, "But is that even role playing?" And I stopped, and I was like, "Fuck," because it's a milsim game with role play as a reward. Right? They do combat. It's very combat heavy. It's very milsim-y. I mean, Halo Mythic is designed for milsim, as that's what the book is. And they're playing Spartans who have a charisma score of below 10, unless you're Craig, whose Spartan 2 has, I think, 45 charisma, but he built a character to be social. So he's definitely an outlier in this instance. I mean, as a note to this, last session they met up with one of their um, an army ranger whose entire team had been annihilated, and he was having a breakdown, and I actually cried doing this breakdown. I pushed myself into character. I thought about some stuff that really bothers me personally, and I cried. And this guy had a full-on breakdown about how his team were gone and how there was no point in living anymore because everyone was dead, and there was no point in fighting the enemy anymore. And this guy was at his limit. And they've had this character as NPC for a long time, so I kind of wanted it to be this big emotional moment. But the Spartans have a charisma score of below 10, so they just kind of looked at him and they were baffled at this emotion because this doesn't happen to them. So they were confused by the I don't understand why you're upset. Just hate the enemy and kill them harder. I believe that was the response was, "We'll hate them and we'll kill them for this." And there was no kind of like, comfort to it. I mean, there was a bit from Craig, but it was mostly just, "Let's just go murder them," right? Um, so the game has moments for role play, but most of it is very combat intensive. Um, and what kind of helps with building these moments is it the role play is the outlier almost, and obviously this is not going to be for everyone as well, right? This kind of game, this kind of experience, is is not what everyone's going to be expecting when you come to play a role-playing game, right? For example, this is completely different from how I'd run Dead Space or how I'd run D&D, or Dark Heresy for that matter, because ultimately the characters that the people play, or the players play, are part of a unit, and they are expected to act like a unit. And something that Shark said was like, I'm killing someone who I trust. I'm killing someone who I trust tactically, and I trust as part of the unit. And they have that because each person, when you sit down to build a character, right? Your kind of get go is, I'm going to think about their backstory or where they come from. And no, not my players. What they think about is, okay, what role is the squad missing? Do we need a medic? Do we need an automatic gunner? Do we need someone who can kill tanks? Like, what combat role do I fill within the team? And that's how they build their characters. So when you build up this level of conflict within the team, it kind of hits on almost a meta level, because when they kill that character, they're also deleting what they do for the team, and they're deleting that kind of skill set. They're deleting that thing from the unit, and they are making themselves less tactically viable as a result of it as well, which is going to make everything harder going forward. And that's just like, the looking at the game as a mill sim. And of course, on top of that, you've got all the psychological issues, and you've got all the role playing issues that kind of come with it, that come with that impact. I've gone down 3 tangents here, and I can't remember my initial point, but I think I went on those tangents pretty convincingly. I can't remember what I started with. Help. I went from one thing to something else, and I genuinely
Good old ADHD, huh?
No worries.
But
Or
PvP is
PvP.
so okay. Let's drop back to a drawing board, right? Let's what I think would be good to discuss, if I so may, Bacon.
Of course.
PvP is negative. It's a bad thing in general, right? It's as a GM, or as a game master, or a dungeon master, galaxy master, whatever you want to be, game mother. That's what they call you in Alien.
I think maybe we should qualify, right? Like, surprise lethal PvP is usually always bad.
Yes, yeah, lethal PvP, because the Alien role-playing game, Mothership. No, not Mothership. I'm chatting shit. Alien. I'm not gonna make things up, right? Come on, PhD Ben. In Alien, in the cinematics you do in Alien, there is the rival buddy system, which one of my players hates, because what it does is off the get-go, it tells you who you should hate and who should get along with. And the Alien system is almost designed to provoke PvP experiences that aren't necessarily lethal. My last game, the last game I ran in person for Alien, no, the game before, ended with one player shooting another player at the escape pod. And that's how it ended. And it was great. It was very climactic. But you kind of go into it, my players know that, and they went into it. Like you said, Bacon, with the Sif game, it's obvious.
Yeah, you know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
It's much easier to deal with it if you know what's coming.
Exactly, right? So yeah, I think lethal PvP as a qualifier, just so we're all talking about the same definition. Also, Bacon, this is something I've started doing a lot more now because of you, actually. A student mentioned something. It was a hypothetical, and without going into this, they said, when you are a skeleton, do you lose your sexuality? And I said, oh, well, let's make a baseline for what do you define as that? Because last time we spoke about, was it Sable's stream, where we talked about defining, was it defining roleplay? And we were talking about something, and you said, well, let's get a baseline for what do we mean? Like, what does this mean? Because everyone can interpret something differently, right?
Yes.
And I started doing that a lot more now because of you. So I wanted to let you know, positive impact, critical thinking brain. Thank you.
Very kind. Thank you.
And Yes, lethal PvP. Addendum. Lethal PvP with the intent to cause aggravation, I think is bad.
Very nicely put. That's a great way of saying that.
Yeah, because you could do lethal PvP without the intent to cause aggravation, right? Like that's exactly what Shark did. It was lethal PvP, but it didn't cause an aggravated response from another player.
Yeah, it was also consistent with the setting and the tone.
Yeah.
Because there are a great many times where people do things that I wish I could solve my problems with headbutts or punches or whatever, right? But you don't, and I think that there's a certain measure of verisimilitude that comes along with that, right? Like you're not really ever going to engage a colleague or a friend or even just an acquaintance with violence because they did something you didn't like. Chances are you're going to remove yourself from the situation, right?
Exactly.
Now, role playing's a bit different. You're questing, you're completing missions, and so that can become an obstruction. So there has to be sort of a different mechanism for that problem solving, which I get. But if you really are in a physical situation where you have to get this person who you're questing with to stop, I think it's more likely that you knock them out than slaughter them. I think you just knock them out.
Mm-hmm.
Like you're annoying. You're causing an issue. The guards are going to hear. Just knock them out. Flat of your blade, pommel on the back of the head. Whatever. That's in a fantasy setting you typically deal with sci-fi, but you break their nose with the butt of your gun or something more than just murdering them. Now this is again in a situation where lethal PvP would not be expected.
Yeah. And I think it's also important, something that we can learn from that, and me recognizing where I actually messed up in this whole PvP situation, reflection being key. I think it's important to go, if you're going to try and engage in these situations, go in with a backup plan in case the other person backs up. It's like, I'm really not comfortable losing my character. For instance, instead of killing Hester, I could have had her knocked out or put in cuffs or something and drug along, or a temporarily arrested type thing. There are all other ways to do it, and I think it's important to go into these situations with a backup plan, or when you propose it to the player, like, hey, this is legitimately what I feel that my character would do, but if you're not comfortable with that, how do you feel about this? Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's ultimately, as from game master's perspective, and also BGD, that comment, I absolutely love that.
Yeah, I think that's he's really kind of nailing what we're getting at here. Is that setting, scenario, genre, and game specific theming serve to frame expectations for how much or how little character cooperation or autonomy is expected by participants at the table. Latitude exists. I agree, and I think that's really what the qualifier is, right? There's a whole bunch of contributing factors that are going to add up to what ends up being expected, but then also permissible within the confines of the game as characters and players relate to one another.
Absolutely. I think, well, I don't think, I know, and just start saying this more often, that I know that if players are coming to a table and you say to them, hey, this has light PvP, they're going to expect and maybe have the freedom to be brave enough to engage in that, right? I find it can be difficult sometimes to explore certain topics with characters because of the sensitivity to it, or the social norms, or things that just aren't acceptable at a table. But if the GM is like, this game has this, and if a player doesn't want to engage in that, they can't. Well, not they can't. They don't have to. Sorry. And they can leave the table, right?
I agree with that. And likewise, you can establish that, like, that doesn't even have to be a GM decision, right? It can be. It can also just be baked into the setting. I was actually talking with Jax earlier via Messenger about Vampire. There's a lot of, implied behaviors. There's a lot of dark theming. There's a lot of dark tone. It's a lot of seeking to gain secret knowledge about individuals in order specifically to exploit to gain a personal advantage. There's a lot that comes along with that, right? PvP is only one of the aspects of those things. And that depends on really like, are we defining PvP exclusively as physical combat? Can we like, how about a very large, very loud disagreement in a social setting among characters? Like that can, depending on the system, be considered PvP if you're sort of, exchanging dice rolls back and forth by way of social scores, by way of, intimidation abilities or, attempts at lying, those sorts of things. So, I mean, that can be just as intense as an encounter as actually coming at someone with a weapon.
Indeed.
I actually have
like a vampire, and I'll be done after this last statement. But vampire in particular, I come from vampire. I love the game. I love the themes. I love the tone. But it's a particular kind of game, and if it's not your thing, then it's probably not even something that you want to try. Right? It's just nope, that's out. I don't do that, and I get it. So it doesn't even have to be an establishment of the GM to say, hey, this has like PvP in it. It can just be like, hey, we're going to play a vampire game. And that's it. That's a lot of information just in the setting that you selected, in the game that you selected. So that's it. That's all I have to say.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
I was going to say the Marcus Montola does a lot of research on, he did a paper on it's positive, negative, or negative, positive. I can never remember which way around it is. Where they did a... I don't think it's an overly moral study, but everyone consented to it, where they talk about how players can have a positive experience from something negative. And I'm not going to discuss the research on a live stream. If you're interested, go look it up. It's an interesting read. I think it's a bit... the information gained from it I found fascinating, but the methods were a bit meh. So basically, they proved that players can have something positive as a group from experiencing something negative, and that's kind of what I was toying with. Was I wanted the players to have we did a bunch of sketchy shit, and we got punished for it, but we're not dead, right? And the plan was to always have them escape persecution. I wasn't going to kill their characters. I'm sorry to lift the veil here a little bit, Shark, but I was never going to kill any of them, even though I talked about it. I wasn't going to actually do that because it would mean everyone's making a new character, and that would have taken consequences for actions right to the extreme. But they've already had their consequences. They've been arrested. They had all of this stuff happen. So for me, fulfillment for that arc had already been done, and now they could enter their survival redemption arc, right?
And it also would have taken away from their player agency, which I know is a massive thing that you try not to do.
Yes, it would have. Well, actually,
you use it for proper tooling, and I trust your usage of it, and I think your usage of it is fantastic. But I know that's generally a thing that you try not to take away.
I think in this instance, if I had have chose to execute the party for doing that, I don't think it would have stripped any agency. And before I get attacked in the comment section for that half sentence, I'm going to explain why I think so. Not once were they told by order they had to do any of that. They chose to engage in that activity. So their agency was, I want to do this thing. Their consequence would have been their player died. Now, if you're playing something like Dark Heresy, and if you decide to, I'm going to go up to the Inquisitor and slap them, they're probably just going to execute you for doing that. Because it's Warhammer. You know that off the get-go, right? And again, to go back to what BGD said, it's the setting scenario genre, right?
Yeah.
So I think I'll wrap around to that, 'cause that's interesting. Passive PvP. I think it's important that agency is a real thing, and I think players need to understand that there's a push and flow with that, and actions have consequences, and that if you do a bad thing, bad things are going to happen to you. Now, what that consequence is is down to the dungeon master and down to the kind of experience they want for the game to have. And I never wanted to kill them off. I could have, and I think I would have been well within my right to do so, but I didn't want to dismantle the team chemistry, the group chemistry. Two separate things there. I didn't want to dismantle those things, and we already had some great stories going that I didn't want to just delete at the click of a finger because it would have been detrimental to the game experience in general.
I'd like to add like a one sentence thing to that.
Yep.
Sorry.
Yes.
It reminds me of my personal from the viewpoint of a player to a GM, and even as a GM to another GM. I am a firm believer in it is not your job as the game master, dungeon master, etc. It's not your job to kill your players. It's your job to make sure that they're having fun while you try to kill them. And it's a cooperative storytelling.
Interesting.
It is interesting. I would have a bit of a different perspective, but I understand that view for sure.
Passive PvP, yeah. So a sort of passive PvP exists when players show resigned indifference towards the PCs of other players. The tank is determined to go toe to toe with the BBEG, so the mage shrugs and hurls a fireball. Yeah, so I think there were moments where the players had done that, where they'd verbalized their dislike for an action that they were doing, or they didn't participate in certain actions, like the when they went into the apartment building, Hester didn't participate in going up there and doing the killing, or when they found the first insurgent and they vivisected them with the energy sword. Some characters didn't partake in that. Some characters partaked in it more based on what their characters' opinions were on these things, right? And you can have this, you can have elements of like interpersonal drama without them having to kill each other, and you can foster that drama, and I think that's a healthier way to do it, because you can always have two characters that say, I don't like the thing you just did, and I think a player feeling confident enough and well, not confident enough, but a player being able to verbalize that in character without getting any kind of like social repercussions is the best thing at a table you could ever have. I think it's important that your players are able to verbalize their disagreement with an action without being penalized. And I think it's fair for players on the opposite side to be able to react to that without being penalized. And this is why I say, consent, communication, creativity, because, anytime I, even as a player, I had an instance where I wanted to push another character. And actually, this was when I was playing D&D with Esther a few weeks ago. There was an instance where someone ran ahead and I wanted to stop them from running ahead. And she was like, cool, roll a strength check. And I looked at the player and I said, are you okay for me to oppose this? Are you okay for me to try and stop you? And they're like, yeah, it's fine, it's whatever, well, Karen, it's fine, it's funny. But I wanted to make sure that there was that my character wants to stop you from doing this, and I don't want to remove your agency, because if doing this really cool thing is really important to another player and they want their moment, because everyone should have their moment, which the context in my group is quite difficult because we have 7 players and 4 hours. It's not a lot of time for everyone to have their moment. So the last thing I want to do is prevent a player from being able to have a moment as a player, and having that kind of conversation. But it's also it's passive to bring it back around. It's passive PvP, right? My character doesn't want to do something, so I'm going to try and stop you. And it's not violent, but it still kind of shows the other players, hey, I don't like that. And that's good, because disagreement is healthy, right? It's good to disagree with someone's opinion on something. It's good to disagree on things, as long as you can talk about it, as long as you can communicate. the issue, right? And again, it needs to come back to without aggressive intent, right? If the mage throws fireball at the tank and it only splashes them, or oh, they're gonna take half damage, and it isn't gonna kill them, or you're gonna fire a healing spell. I love D&D. Yeah, I play so much D&D. Me, you throw a healing spell at them or a healing potion at them, or even if you just stop and say, "Hey, I'm throwing fireball at that guy, regardless of what you do," and there's that air of consent is there, then yeah, it's perfectly fine, right? Or a character eating all of the rations at the campfire. It ain't gonna kill the other character, but it sends a message that you don't like them, and that's fun. That can be fun, right? Only if it's okay, and that
Yeah, and that has to do with group dynamic, tone,
Yep.
setting,
setting, scenario, genre,
establishment. It has to do with establishment as well, because like if you are 10 games in or 10 sessions in, and now all of a sudden you're starting to eat all the rations when everyone's at camp, it's like, what are you doing? But if it's the first thing, session 1, you're doing that sort of thing, then it goes a long way to sort of mollifying the rest of the group for that kind of behavior.
That says a lot more about you than it does the
yeah.
God.
I think it also, this is something that should come up in every session 0. And I think that's also kind of part of just the basics of running a game, is having that session 0. When you first start the campaign, where if somebody's joining in the middle, you have that moment to sit and talk with the person and be like, hey, look, or the group of people, this is what I have planned for the campaign. This is the type of setting. This is what I'm looking to have in here. Like, say, no PvP, or it's okay for light, PvP, whatever. This is the kind of content that you're going to see. Blood and guts and gore, or political intrigue, etc. The whole thing. It's just one of the many things to do on a session 0, but I think I have needed to be I haven't done it every single time, but the only times I think of when it's been brought up in like rule session 0 type environments, I've been the only one to do it, and it's been like once or twice through the years that I've played tabletop stuff since back in like 2018, 2017 or so. And it's something people don't bring up, but it's important.
I'm a big advocate of the social contract as outlined in Shauner's book, How to Roleplay the Hard Way, or Role Playing the Hard Way. I'm probably getting the title incorrect. But it's an actual document that.
Is it the RPG consent checklist?
No, it's not really a consent checklist. It's just, hey, here's what the game is going to be. No phones at the table. Pay attention. Act in character. Like those sorts of things. Which I guess can amount to a consent checklist, kind of, sort of. But it's like, especially so if there are personal hangups, if there are issues that you don't want to be involved in the game, that's the time to sort of set it out and write it down. And then everyone gets a copy. Well, they don't have to sign it. It's not a legal document, rather, but it's sort of a tactile way of saying, okay, here, this is what this game is going to be about. This is what this game can and cannot include. And I think having that to constantly refer back to it, establishes the expectation very well. And B, it provides a hard physical level between session 0 and the start of the game, because you can talk about whatever you want to talk about in session 0 with regard to player activity and game expectations, but writing it down, taking that step to write it down, no one's going to forget it. It's written down. And if they do forget it, you have it to refer to say, nope, can't do that. Or, this is what you agreed to. This is the kind of game we're playing. And so I'm a really huge advocate for specifically that, the social contract. There's probably a better name for it, but it's that's what it's
I've
called.
seen it called a few different things.
Yeah.
I've even filled one out myself when joining a campaign before, where they send a sheet of saying, "Here's a checklist of a bunch of different things that could be potential content warnings for an individual. Check the boxes of all the things that you're not okay with,
Is it the
or that are
RGB
like your
checkboxes?
hard X." Sorry, what?
Mhm.
Is it the RGB checkboxes? Or the
It
RY?
could be.
Sorry, the green, yellow, red one, because that's the
Yeah, I think it was.
Monty. That's the
Yeah.
Monty Cook Games RPG consent checklist. Which I
Okay.
had my Tuesday group before Shark had joined. I had them check it out, and I had them do it, and we'd paid lots of 40K. And one of the things is harm to children and harm to animals. And the player had left a comment saying, "I'm pretty sure we airstriked a hospital in 40K once." And they still ticked yellow, which is okay if veiled off stage, might be okay on stage, but requires discussion ahead of time. So they said it in jest, right? Grim jest, obviously. But they still were like, I'd rather not, right? And I thought that was interesting because from a group that play lots of 40K, and 40K is like, it's grim dark, is grim, horrible things happen. They, they make these like horrible birthing pods out of people and stretch their skin to make Astartes, right? Like,
Yeah, 1,000 people are shoveled into the maw of the Emperor every day.
every day.
Yeah, it's bad.
It's like it's overly dark for the sake of being dark, hence grim dark, right? But no, not even that. That's an incorrect description. I'm looking at your YouTube comments. I'm watching you. But yeah, it's dark for being dark, and because me and my group had played that kind of game for a long time, their opinion on things and was different. It was very jaded because they just didn't care too much about it. But the reason why I brought it up was because I learned about it doing research, and I thought, oh, this might be a good thing to actually see what my players are okay with. And the one thing that I really wanted to check what my players were okay with was bromance, because for the Halo game, I wanted to touch on that a bit more with my NPCs, and I wanted to touch on interpersonal connections, and I wanted to touch upon, when people lose a loved one, it's devastating, and I want the characters to have. I want the characters to feel like they're actual people that have relationships with people, and I wanted that to be prevalent. So what I was kind of testing for was how much people are okay with that, because the Halo game has adult themes, and I wanted to explore that further. So I got a gauge of what my players were and weren't comfortable with, and that was my hard limit. That's where your line is. And I think for anyone that GMs, especially if you're GMing at a convention or you're GMing people you haven't done, the Monty Cook Games consent checklist will take 5 minutes to fill out, not even that. And it goes through just to list off. It talks about horror, what kind of creatures and stuff they are not okay with or okay with, like demons, blood, gore, eyeballs, harm to animals, harm to children, rats, spiders, space for text. And then it talks about romance, so you can either fade to black, explicit, between PC and NPC, between PCs. Also talks about sex, same questions. Social and cultural issues like homophobia, racism, real world religion, sexism, specific cultural issues. I think that is a whole loaded conversation for another day. And then there's also mental and physical health issues like claustrophobia, cancer, freezing to death, gaslighting. I don't even know why gaslighting is there as an option. It's like you shouldn't do that to anyone. But it also talks about
Sorry for
self-harming.
use as a villain.
Self-harm and other things, and terrorism, torture, etc., etc. And I think it's important that your players are given this checklist if you're going to be running anything that is that has these themes in, because it's okay if you want to run a game where you're dealing with radical insurgents that are going to do things horrendously at a library with a chemical weapon. That's the kind of game you want to run. That's fine. But your players need to 1000% be okay with that. Because if they're not, then that's just going to be a shit experience for them. Right? We did a session where they were reinforcing a school, and there were police outside the school, and there were still students inside. And before the session, I just gave them a disclaimer warning. I'm like, you're going to a school, and you're going to rescue like teenagers. Just so you're aware, this is what we're doing today. If you're not okay with that, I need to know. Because I kind of wanted to, like, whenever you watch like a SWAT TV show, and they always do like the school shooter episode, and it's like they kind of really push the this is dark and depressing vibe with it. And I feel like they only do that for that exact reason, because it's like, emotionally, we can all kind of connect with kids shouldn't be doing that, and it's sad, and it's extra sad, right? And it's more gripping, and it's more emotional. And I knew that my players would be okay with it. I still asked. Because you just don't know.
It could be an off day for them. They could be having an emotionally rough day and just not capable of handling a thing.
Yeah, exactly.
And then that goes into how to deal with that as a player and as a GM and other stuff. But
yeah,
that's a whole other conversation.
And there's a bunch of like safety rules as well. So there's lines and veils, and there's X cards. I think Bacon for Dead Space, I use X cards, right?
If you did, I didn't know. It never came up once, so you may have, and I just didn't know about it. In fact, that's another thing I was talking to Jax about earlier this morning, because there was a conversation on Heath's channels. He runs a channel. One of the inspirations for my own channel, Heath Robinson. He runs Heath's Geekverse, and there's apparently discussion. It's a sort of a topic of conversation, a contemporary topic of conversation, because one of the new Dungeons and Dragons manuals mentions safety tools or something along those lines. I personally have an aversion to safety tools. It's a very visceral reaction that I have. Jax prefers and I would say finds them important, and so we had a little bit of a discussion, just a calm discussion from either perspective, and we likely both moved each other, at least more towards understanding. If we didn't move each other toward one side or the other, we at least understand it more.
Could I just have a brief inquire as to why? Do you think that they? I'm going to make an assumption. Do you think that they intrude on the game? And do you think that they are restrictive if they're there? Like, for example, if you're wanting the players to be freaked out by fighting a giant spider, that should be okay because they should be freaked out by it.
Funny that you're bringing spiders up, because that came up too.
Yeah.
So here's the deal, right? I think that when safety tools are brought up, or X cards, I think that what I have a tendency to do is default toward putting the tools in the hands of someone who would abuse them. So someone who would say, I don't like the way this game is going. I don't like the way you're playing your character. I'm going to throw this card, and now I'm holding the table hostage until we do or don't do what I want to do. So that's my tendency. My tendency is to put it into the hands of an abuser. And that's, not necessarily the best way to have a conversation, which I'm very happy to admit, and I will readily admit it. And so it's also, I think there's a little bit of a generational divide here. I'm from Gen X, and so I have certain views based on the way I was brought up. And then Jax's view is the millennial view, which I believe would be your view as well.
I'm just Gen Z, unfortunately.
Oh, okay. Well, hey, yeah. I'm not criticizing anyone.
No.
You were born at a certain time, right? What can you do?
We got all three here.
So like there's a little bit of that has to, so like you have to kind of try to cross a generational divide, and I'm never usually one to try, like, I have my opinions, I have strong opinions, I can issue strong yeses and strong nos. That doesn't mean I can't see something from someone else's opinion, right?
Absolutely, yeah. That's what I love about these discussions, because we can have, I can absolutely see what you're saying. I feel like I feel safety tools are fantastic because they allow players to feel safe at the table. It allows
Jax
them
had a
to
similar statement. Jax
yeah,
said
yeah.
something similar, and
Jax,
I still need to think about it a bit more.
They actually just liked the comment on the post on Facebook. So hi, Jax, if you're here, hello.
It's also, I think, up to the GM and players at the table to discuss and take care of somebody who of a player that is abusing those tools, just like it would be for any other
Absolutely.
tool.
Yeah, I can absolutely see what you're saying, Bacon, because what they could do is they could say, well, we're not fighting a dragon because I'm scared of dragons, right? And they could be malicious with it. I think it's important that it's done in good faith. I mean, I think apart from the child incident, I've not had to X card anything, and even then we didn't X
Yeah.
card. We just took a bit of a stop, and
I think the session ended there.
No, I didn't.
I mean, like,
didn't.
I do understand that, right? Like, I default toward putting it in the hands of an abuser, which isn't necessarily the best place to have a conversation. But
it could, right? It could.
It could, but like, so could a bunch of other things that I'm an advocate for that I'm not going to say, well, we can't do that anymore because it could end up in the hand of someone who, has nefarious intent. Like, that's not, doesn't make any sense. It's not consistent with my worldview. And so, after having been confronted with that idea, I'm now sort of in a spot, and this is just this morning, right? I'm now in a spot where it's like, well, I kind of have to do a little bit more careful consideration here. Like, I still don't love them. I still think that, and let me be a little bit more clear with where I'm coming from.
Absolutely. Yeah.
I like to either take care of things beforehand, as in a session 0 or a social contract, so that you can say, okay, these things are off limits, and then you can just role play, right? Because the ideal situation is to be as inside the head of the other character as much and as genuinely as possible. So I think adding things to the game that would subtract from that or that would obstruct that ends up being a negative. Now, here's the thing, though. If in the middle of play something comes up that you didn't necessarily address in the social contract and someone has an issue with it, play is going to stop regardless, right?
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
At least if they are capable of giving voice to that issue, play is going to stop regardless. So now we're already, out of the headspace of our characters. Immersion's been broken. The tone of the scenario has probably been completely shattered because now you're going to have to reorient yourselves. It's going to take you 10 minutes to 15 minutes to get back into it, at least according to what the experts say. After mode switching, because it is a mode switch. So like, I don't know, right? Like, there's a lot of things to consider here, and I think that, generally speaking, I'm still probably more likely to prefer, personally, not to use them.
Yeah.
As I said before, I'm Gen X. I place particular importance on personal accountability, and I take particular. I place importance on self-actualization and self-resolution. And so if I have a problem with something, it's up to me to resolve my problem. It's no one else's responsibility. So that's how I tend to approach the situation, right? Like, if I'm handling my own problem, if I have an issue with animal abuse and there is a movie on with animal abuse, I'll turn it off. Or if there's a video game with animal abuse, I'll turn it off. Or whatever
Yeah,
the
absolutely.
situation
Yeah.
is.
It's
So,
also like building off of the responsibility of the person. It is also the responsibility of a player to inform the GM of any kind of uh, things that are normally not in game, that normally don't mess with people. Like if you got a specific type of trouble you work through, say, "Hey, look, I've got really bad arachnophobia. Can we please not do spiders?" That's such an easy thing to do, right? But it's the player's responsibility to bring that up. It's also the player's responsibility to cope with that fear, deal with that fear. The GM technically doesn't really have to listen to that, although a good GM would. But it's at the end of the day the player's responsibility to bring things up that are problematic, that they know could potentially be problematic.
I agree with that, and I think that there's also this idea, and let me actually read Chris's comment here first. To reiterate, because Chris was there this morning also in chat. So to reiterate my comments to Bacon from this morning, the X card is a perfectly valid tool in a larger communication toolkit, but it's neither a necessary resource nor a panacea. It comes with baggage.
Yeah.
I agree, and Chris had a lot of, or BGD had a lot of very prescient, very intelligent, very poignant things to say in chat this morning. I kind of, I wasn't really aggravated or animated. I just kind of spoke my piece. I said, this is what I think of, X cards or safety tools in general. I don't like here's another issue that I have with them is that I don't like that you're selling me a setting and system book and telling me how to play my game in that setting or system book. Like if you want to say somewhere in the book for more on safety tools, go here and redirect them somewhere else, that's one thing.
Yeah.
I have no problem with that. But to devote entire sections to it that I am invariably going to have to flip through when I need to reference the rules, like you're making, like your compound. And again, this is likely a minor issue, but it's just something that kind of sticks in my craw about it.
Yeah, absolutely. I think I can get behind what you're saying, and this is where it comes back to knowing your players. Right, because I did the consent checklist with my group that played 40k for years. They didn't give a shit,
right?
Because
like,
because
right, like who cares?
And because they play 40k, I think in one of the games you played, they were shooting. There was a Nurgle plague, and they were told to not let anyone evacuate because they could be infected. And as they were landing, all of the civilians were coming to try and evacuate. The commissar told them to go away. They didn't. So the commissar was like, "Okay, cool, open fire." And as they fired, I was like, you nail this guy's dog, you nail this kid, like you kill all of these people. But it's 40k. That's whatever. It's Tuesday, right? But if
you also have a way of describing that too to really make it impact.
Yeah, I do, don't I? But in like D&D, that would be, if D&D is like traditionally like it's like your mage and wizard hero adventure, and doing that kind of stuff in D&D would be a lot more traumatic, and it wouldn't be expected, right? You wouldn't be, again, to come back to what the BGD said,
the system setting and
genre absolutely dictates what tools you should use or shouldn't. I still firmly believe that there should be at least I think at conventions there should be a either the social contract should be written out so players know what they're getting in for.
Indeed.
But that's only because it's a public event and you don't know who's coming to your table. And I think that is a consideration. Like if you have a mom and 3 kids coming to play, maybe you shouldn't have them get murdered by bats. And
I've never had a great experience at a convention where I haven't known at least a single person at the table. So I had a blast last year at Rune Jammer. BGD actually invited me, and there were 2 games that I played, I think. His was one of them. There was another one that I played in, and the other one didn't have anyone that I knew. not a great experience. And that's not for anyone being, particularly strange or, it's just, I didn't know anyone. And so you don't know what to expect in that group of people, right? So with Chris, at the very least, through interactions with, or BGD, I'm sorry, I should say BGD. So with him, I knew what I was getting, right? There was interactions in Discord, there were interactions in chat, there were conversations. We saw eye to eye on some things, we disagreed on some other things, knew what I was getting, knew his approach, at least insofar as he had explained it, hadn't experienced it, had a great time. Absolutely awesome. So I generally tend to avoid unless I'm there with a group of people who I'm there with and we're all going to sit down and play the game together. I know all the players, or if I know the GM, conventions have just never been great for me. When I don't know anyone, caveat, I have to not know anyone for it to not be great.
That also kind of, I think, boils down to the player by player basis a bit.
Yeah.
And I didn't say something but I want to real quick.
Yeah, I'm agreeing with you. Yeah.
Yeah. I had to learn this the hard way, with at least running games at a convention. Not just your classic, hey, speak through your voice the right way, you're gonna lose your voice on day 2. Hi. But the understanding that in such a social and open setting as a convention, you can't rely on solely your ability to just judge a player by the cover in the first few minutes of them playing or whatever. You have to do some kind of thing to get connected to the players. I think like that checklist, I am a big advocate for that, or allowing safety tools in that kind of environment because you don't know these players. Those, I think that's and plus it's hard, admittedly, both running and playing at a convention, it's quite difficult to get into character and into the scenery a lot of the time because it's loud there. You're in around people you don't really know. There's no kind of camaraderie already built up. It's a different experience. So in that kind of instance, your immersion and everything is already broken. So I think it's important to have those safety tools there at a convention and that checklist.
I think
you want to make sure
really.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
No. Oh, you're good. I just
I
kind
was
of
just going to say, I really think you landed
that.
on one of my major issues with con games is that, and again, this is going to go for games that that I've played where no one's in it, but generally speaking, I think con games are very gamey, right? Con games are typically there to sell a product or to demo a game, and so they end up being very gamey, and there's not really a whole lot of role play there, right? It's
there's a little bit, but
right. There's a little bit because
you'll play your character with whatever personality, but generally you're there for pre-built modules for say Pathfinder Society or Adventure League for 5e or whatever. Right. You'll have the pre-built stuff. It's just I agree with you. It's gamey. You're there more for the experience of just playing with other people, not necessarily for building a story.
What's interesting about that is so I went to the UK Games Expo last year with Dax, one of my players. They came all the way down from Pennsylvania to come stay with me for 2 weeks, and we went to the UK Games Expo and it was great. Apart from the one talk we went to that was really bad. I'm not going to name and shame, but it was shit. And the one we thought was going to be bad was really good. Anyway, at the convention, I said to Dax, the one thing I want to do. You good?
Yeah, I'm good. I'm going to mute Mike real quick. Wrong part.
Okay, don't die. I need you. One of the things I wanted to do was play Alien. Now, if you've been watching on the channel for a while, you know that I love Alien, and the Alien RPG is my favorite, one of my favorite systems. And one of the things
you run it really well.
Thank you. One of the things that the Dax was, I want to play Alien because I've never actually played the damn thing. I've only ever ran it. And my first ever experience playing the Alien RPG was at a convention. And I loved it. We had so many moments to role playing, and I got real immersed real fast. Now, I don't know if that's just because it was my first time playing, so you get there's a bit of like bias there with it.
Yeah,
It was
the
my first
excitement.
time, but I had a lot of fun with it, and we had a bunch of strangers. Admittedly, though, I wasn't by myself. I did have a friend with me, albeit a friend I'd never met before, but a friend. But I had a lot of fun with it. But they didn't do safety tools. But what the GM did say, and he said it very curtly at the start, was it's Alien. You've all seen Alien. Yes? Okay, it's Alien. That was it, right? And that was enough of a disclaimer to be like, cool, I'm either going to be, sexually assaulted by a crab vagina, or I'm going to get penetrated by a penis on legs.
Yes,
that's what they are. That's what those things are. Don't come at me. I have a whole. Sometimes I subject my friends to the alien sex talk. But that's what those things are. The alien's scary because of that. Blah blah blah. But yeah, that was enough of a warning at the start to be like, this is going to happen. And I think that was consent enough, right? That was consent enough to say it's Alien. You know what you're here for, right?
Good. Sometimes that's all you need too.
Yeah.
I have a question though, because it's coming. I was just thinking that it might be relevant to our different experiences of cons and playing there. Me personally, I've really only ran a game at a con in like one of those really big rooms that's just sectioned off with room dividers or whatever, with a lot of people. But I do know that sometimes they have their own personal kind of rooms that are less tables and whatnot. What was the experience that you
it was like
had
that. Yeah, it was
the second one.
There were 6 games running in there, and you could hear the other games going on. But yeah, I think that definitely would add to the experience because of the noise, right?
Yeah. What about you, Bacon? What was yours?
It was open air, actually. It was on the, I guess, the exhibit floor. So they had tables and chairs. Yeah, they had tables and chairs set up on the exhibit floor, and it was, it was just mostly with Runejammer and BGD. It's a digital con. I don't know. There could be some sort of physicality to it, but I attended digitally. So that con was me alone in a room with my computer on, kind of, focusing on the game and the players. Like, that's a completely different scenario, right?
Oh yeah, we each had separate stuff then for that. Gotcha.
Yeah. So look at that. We're all different. We're all individuals. Yes, we're all individuals.
And only one of us killed a kid in a tabletop game.
Hey, that was your choice.
I know.
Hey man, sometimes those kids gotta go.
They do. Go. Hey, for all I know, that could have been maybe one of those insurrectionists that just ages really well. Or if it's a kid, that's a kid of insurrectionist. That's a terrorist. It's gotta go.
I mean, let's be real. If you killed both their parents, they probably would have grown up and radicalized with that kind of worldview. I think I'd be pissed off too, wouldn't you?
Yeah.
Or maybe they'd make a really good beta company, Spartan.
Never know.
Tomorrow will die like, I guess, yeah, we'll never know, won't we, Shark? But yeah.
Oh well. But anyway,
only killed. I think to kind of pull it back to PvP, I think I think we've covered it quite well. And I think it's PvP that has to be done intelligently. There definitely has to be fought, and there has to be intent, at least narrative intent with PvP. I think I'm actually going to write about those 3 C's. I think I'm quite happy with that. I think it's consent, communication, creativity.
Yes.
I mean, unless anyone wants to kind of like hook me on that, but I think those 3 things allow PvP to be as damage free for your table, because there's always going to be some damage or some collateral because you are losing something.
Yep.
It allows you to create that kind of element safely. I think if this were an Alien game and not a Halo game, I think it would have been easier, because in going into Alien, you go into that with the expectation, cool, I'm gonna die, and it takes like 2 minutes to make a character. So the investment is lessened there on the offset. The emotional attachment is less, right? Whereas in Halo, it takes considerably longer to make a character because it is you'll love this, Bacon. So Halo Mythic is a highly customized, expanded on version of Only War. Only War is just a highly customized version of Dark Heresy. Dark Heresy is just a very highly customized version of Call of Cthulhu, which is just basic role playing.
Right.
So Mythic is just basic role playing with like a million extra steps.
It's basic role playing with extra steps.
Yeah, it's just PPR.
To relate it back to what you were saying regarding Alien and Halo, it's like in Halo you are a military superhero.
Well,
in Alien, you're a wet paper bag full of meat.
Yeah, you know what? Yeah, absolutely. I mean, though I did run a Mythic session where they were all cops, and let me tell you, I put the fear of God into them with 5 jackals and 2 grunts. Because the power level was like, Halo allows, because it's tiered play, you can go from being a civilian to being a Forerunner god if you wanted to. Like there is scalability for that. So you can play on the lower end of the scale and get decimated in combat, or you can be a Spartan and be invincible.
Yeah, everyone's Captain America.
Yeah, exactly. That's what Tuesday feels like anyway. I can never fucking kill any of them. I mean, what? You're not supposed to kill your players. But
well, look, depending on the game, they're going to do it for you.
Yeah, that's true. We just might. Also, I if we've got time, I did think what I like doing with this situation. It's also fun. Well, I don't know if fun is the right word here, but maybe my definition is fun. Fun is different than other people's. I find it fun to kind of explore and take advantage of the psychological impact a PvP situation would have on the character that does the killing and the party as a whole. It's from a roleplay perspective, it as grim as it is, it's such an amazing thing to happen because of the things you can do with your character. It gives you a
It's coming.
Yeah. It's fantastic because here's the fun thing about Mythic is it has rules for and tables for everything. And when I say everything, the session that Mirabelle killed Hester, not even a few hours in game after that, they lost another squad member who was closer than a brother to Mirabelle. Kind of like inseparable best friends for life type of deal. He died and made her squad lead. So I had rolled 4 times for her to develop a mental disorder because Mythic has a table for that. And that's what the cool roleplay aesthetic of these kind of things allow as well, is the story building. That's part of what makes for good PvP is the story building. So because of that, because of my part of the consequences of my actions as a player, I'm now playing a character that has a medical diagnosis of being obsessed with war and violence. So now I have this whole other aspect to add to my character. And as so correctly put, brain damage as well, because a 16-year-old killing another child as if they've already killed another child and then having to kill a sister and then seeing their best friend die, you kind of go through some stuff. And not every game is going to be that rough, mind you. Ben's game is just, it's that brutal for us sometimes. So your mileage may vary, but you do want to, I think it's a wonderful opportunity to really flesh out your character's story. Really think about how it would affect them to do this action. Why is it that they are wanting to kill this other individual? Why is it that they feel happy about it, depressed about it, whatever? Really think about it and have your character go through this grieving process or redemption arc or vengeance or evil arc or whatever your case may be. It can be a wonderful tool to advance the story. It's definitely something that I think is shied away from for a very good reason, but just like most, if not all things, with proper understanding of it and proper knowledge, it can be something beautiful for story writing.
You should, if you think Mythic's mental trauma chart is good, you should look at the Dark Heresy one because it's infinitely better. Dark Heresy has an entire insanity tracker for all of this kind of stuff, and so does Call of Cthulhu. I mean, Call of Cthulhu even has like temporary elements as well. So there are systems that do it way better, but that's only because those elements of play are core mechanics for the game. So in Call of Cthulhu, going insane is like a whole part of your character,
Yeah,
and
Call
in
of
Dark
Cthulhu's
Heresy,
on like what, 7th edition? It's been refined,
only.
and refined and re-refined. Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I mean, like
I actually
your
wrote
game...
about that on a paper recently. Actually,
nice.
Is it available to read? I'd love to read it.
Not yet. Will be soon though.
We'll send it when it is.
Shotgun.
Yeah. And even your game doesn't need a mental illness chart to do something like this. You can be creative of your own. Go pull something from another system for your character. Just think of something yourself. There's many things you can do with it. But yeah, I don't know. Have fun with it. But consent, communication, and creativity.
Yeah.
And cannolis.
Yeah. Don't be afraid to throw the ball back and forth between you and another player. Bounce off of each other. It's called collaborative storytelling for a reason.
No, you'll do what I want.
Get in with that. Oh no!
You die.
The total non-player agency you gave me with the whole Black Ops thing, where I totally didn't have a choice and had to do bad stuff. No, I chose every single one of that.
Yeah, and just on the record, you feel like you've had agency in my game, right?
Absolutely. I have so much agency in your game. Well, within reason. And
Yeah.
when you give something where you're like, let's think about it because of other stuff, it's 9 times, no, actually about 10 times out of 10, it's good for a good fucking reason. Trust, if you've been playing with a GM long enough, trust them, and you can trust them to do fun story stuff. Let them do their thing. Get to catching on when it's the GM basically just saying, shut up and let me do my thing, trust me on this, but in a nicer way. But yeah, I have plenty of player agency. I consistently tell people Ben is like the best GM I've ever had for tabletop stuff.
I tell people that same thing, and I've only been in one of his games.
Yeah, the only downside is just you don't do different voices that well, but maybe that's just because I'm a dumb American and can't really tell much difference between British accents.
But
that's fine.
For my birthday game, I had a character who was supposed to be French, and I said to my players, "Hey, that guy was supposed to be French," and they all said French. Yeah. I mean, I think I tried doing a voice for Langley, and I stopped.
It was like nobody's perfect. No,
I don't think voices are necessary. And frequently
not.
They can sort of pull away from the there-ness of the role-playing experience.
I did a Western voice once, and
I've had a GM who can do amazing
voices,
stop. But like when you compare a GM's talent of like voices to how do they actually run their games and everything, that's a completely different story. I wouldn't a million times over want a GM like Ben over a GM that's like pretty good rules wise and rule of cool wise and does good voices, but you got somebody over here who's got good writing, and if you allow him to take a little bit of that player agency away from time to time, you get a beautiful story. It's being a GM is a careful, and I think a lot of people that don't really GM or barely GM don't really realize this. It's a really fucking hard job to do. The amount of creative pressure that's put onto them to make things and manage these scenarios and everything with upwards of like up to 6 or 7 other people at times. Cut your GM some slack, doing the best they can. Hopefully they are, at least. But yeah, with plenty of player agency, you get stuff like the beautiful PvP moments, or choosing whether you want your squad to go down a more Black Ops route, or a more no, screw your Black Ops operations. That's harming humanity. I'm going to go do this other thing. There's plenty of choices. It's great. I rambled a bit. My apologies.
No, that's so good. I think I did a Western accent. No, a Northern accent, a Texan accent. Man, I don't know geography. One of my players is Texan, and he just said, "Stop," and I was like, "Okay." And
Very funny.
sometimes I do voices. I find that my the one thing I do is that my female characters will have a softer tone and inflection to it. That's it. I did do a voice for the French guy, but I stopped doing it because I just couldn't. No. Mythic is very rules intensive, and my headspace needed to be on. I need to remember how sniper rifles 5 special rules work to kill things. It's 3 special rules, but you get the idea. Yeah, I love jamming, and I love being able to create these experiences. And I know in the past when I mentioned like how I run horror games is, because horror intrinsically is the removal of agency. And I know people are going to disagree with having agency revoked from you at the table. But it is a jamming game makes us absolutely.
Yeah, I'm going to agree.
As a player now, there are things that I think about now that I would never have thought about. Like if the GM makes a little mistake or they forget to do something, it's like, it's whatever. I don't make a fuss out of it, or I don't bring something up. Or if there's like a minor plot inconsistency, I don't point it out. Because the GM forgets things, and that's okay. They're human. And if you don't point them out, it doesn't ruin anyone else's immersion, right? But it's like, it's the players have to trust that the GM is doing everything in good faith, and everything they're doing is for the betterment of the experience. So if the GM is going to revoke some agency for an effect, you should trust that they're doing that in good faith. The problem with this argument where it kind of collapses is that if GMs weaponize that and use that to only do a certain thing, or to not really let the players role play, then you've got a problem, right? So it's not something you can have a blanket statement on and say, well, the GM says PvP is bad, so it's bad. It's like that isn't the case, because you don't know what kind of game you're coming into, and you also don't know what kind of game master you have. They could be a bad game master. They could be an adversary game master, which is what I'd count myself as, because I do very much try to build my encounters around inflicting damage on the party and trying to at least kill one of them, because I want my enemies to feel lethal, and I do that by actually being lethal.
Yeah,
that's something you brought up right in the beginning before
right
I played
at the
in
start.
the first session.
My enemies will try and kill you.
That's an important thing to note as well, and I can prove it to, because I'm your player. I'm here. That's one of the first things you were like, I do a brutal game. I'm not forgiving my enemy. I play my enemies to kill you. I'm like, that's fine. I'm playing as a Spartan. It makes complete and total sense. Like,
and there's a difference between adversarial and antagonistic.
Yeah, exactly.
GMs are necessarily adversarial. They have to be. And the way that I try to illustrate this is by saying, my day job is a QA, so I test systems to make sure that they're not broken. I have an adversarial relationship with the developers. They create the code, and I go in and try to tell them how the code is insufficient. That's adversarial. Yeah. But we're both working toward the same goal of producing a quality product that the public, or whoever the audience is, can use. And it's the same thing with the GM. Mm-hmm. You're on two sides of a fence, but you're not antagonistic. You're not trying to engender resentment. You're not trying to make people angry, but you are definitely adversarial, because You are the mover of consequence.
You're the arbiter of
Yes.
fate.
Yeah.
Or it's so easy.
I see what you did there.
Thank you.
Clever
I
girl.
think this might be a pretty solid place to stop. I still have to
Absolutely.
get dinner, so I'm gonna start
Ah,
looking.
is it Taco Wednesday, Good Tuesday?
It is now.
Yeah, hell yeah.
Hey. Here we
I was like, how
go.
do I reply to that? Well, it is now.
well-
Shark, thank you so much for reaching out and asking
Yeah.
to sort of discuss this from your side. Ben, thank you so much as always for attending.
Absolutely.
Chat, thank you so much for taking a look, and BGD in particular, thank you for the engagement. I really appreciate it. I meant all the good things that I said about you. Here he is again. Thanks to the entire panel for a very interesting discussion.
Thank you.
I'm just over the moon to have you guys here and watching, and Ben participating, Shark participating. I'm interested to hear about what's going to happen in the future to your Halo Mythic game. Is there anywhere that can find you, or does anyone can click over to a YouTube channel or anything?
I do record. I have been recording the game for over a year. I haven't done anything with it yet.
Oh, okay.
I'm planning to put them out on YouTube, but I'm not sure yet. I think I might do it once we finish the game, but that's a conversation that needs to happen with the group at some point.
Sure.
I mean, I am slowly making my space more of a public space, and I'm in discussions with the creators of Halo Mythic about running a community game on the Mythic server. So I suppose the two places you can find me is on Twitter. It's just me, Ben Rimmer. You can find me on Twitter. I work at the University of Staffordshire, so you can find me there. Or you can find me in the 100 DOS or Halo Mythic server, where I'm fairly loved over there. And I think eventually I'm going to make my play space more of a public space. I'm just seeing kind of how that goes, but that's where you can find me. Also, you can find me on Better with Bacon every other Wednesday when we talk about all sorts of intriguing TTRPG topics.
Indeed.
And you can find me in Ben's games.
Yeah,
Well,
come sign up. I've got so many players.
Yeah.
All right, everyone. I think this, like I
Fuck
said,
around
good
with
place
Tony.
to end. I'm just going to click the button. You're going to stare at my ugly face for a couple seconds while it cuts. Again, thank you, everyone who was in attendance, everyone who watches later. Ben and Shark, I really appreciate you guys doing this. So we'll see you soon. Take care, everyone.